When most film enthusiasts think of English horror, generally they think of Hammer, the iconic film production company based at Bray Film Studios at Berkshire, near London. Between 1951 and 1966, Hammer Studios turned out critical and commercial successes like The Curse of Frankenstein, The Devil Rides Out, and Dracula Prince of Darkness. But a lesser-known English horror movie studio also provided its fair share of nightmare fuel during this time. This is the story of Amicus, the vault of horror movies. Amicus was founded in 1962 by American producers and screenwriters Milton Subotsky and Max Rosenberg. It was based at Shepperton Studios in Surrey, southwest of London, quite near Heathrow Airport as the crow flies. Shepperton Studios had been a major hub for film and television production since 1931, so was a natural fit for the fledgling production company. Their first two films produced were musical comedies, with It's Trad Dad being released in 1962, and Just for Fun coming out in 1963. But their third release would change the overall trajectory of Amicus for good. 1965's Dr. Terror's House of Horrors was their first horror film, and their first horror anthology film, a genre and storytelling format that would serve the studio well over the years. The movie made no apologies about the audience it was going for, or the coattails it was riding on. The casting of Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing cleverly, if cheekily, implied to cinema-goers that this was a new Hammer movie. And in a pre-internet era, it would be difficult to correct the false assumption in the minds of the prospective audience. And clearly, this was what Amicus were counting on. For all intents and purposes, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors looked like a Hammer movie. But those who saw the film quickly realized that it was more heavily inspired by different source material. It was in fact a lot closer to EC horror comics like Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror than Hammer Gothic horror. The premise saw a fortune-teller played by Peter Cushing using tarot cards to read the futures of 5 fellow passengers. This tied together 5 chilling horror anthology stories. The film was an enormous financial success compared to their first 2 features, and set the stage for what was to come. 1965 also saw the release of Doctor Who and the Daleks, also starring Peter Cushing. Adapted from the hit BBC series, a ready-made audience saw another success for Amicus. A third release in 1965 saw a return to horror. The Skull was written by Milton Subotsky in collaboration with Psycho author Robert Bloch. This collaboration gave the movie a strong pedigree. It also reunited Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in a chilling story about a skeletal artifact possessed by an evil spirit. 1966 saw the release of The Psychopath, a horror thriller written by frequent Amicus collaborator Robert Bloch. Then came the return of Doctor Who and the Daleks, in 1966 with Daleks Invasion Earth 2150 AD. A post-apocalyptic tale told on a grand scale, this one gave Amicus another science fiction hit. In 1967, Amicus tackled the Nature Strikes Back genre with The Deadly Bees. Again written by Robert Bloch, it told the tale of a farmer raising the titular deadly bees on a small remote island. It wasn't exactly on the same scale or as well received by critics and fans as the later Irwin Allen killer bee movie, The Swarm. Amicus returned to more familiar horror anthology territory with The Torture Garden, also released in 1967. Starring Jack Palance and Burgess Meredith, it gave us 4 short horror stories about people visiting a haunted fairground attraction. For Amicus, the remainder of the 1960s saw production of a few science fiction and drama films that remain largely forgotten. But they came back in a new decade with the oddity Scream and Scream Again in 1970. The film is about an alleged vampire killer who is draining the blood of their victims. The House That Dripped Blood came in 1971. Another anthology film, this one also featured John Pertwee, best remembered as creepy scarecrow Wurzel Gummidge. The 4 stories were based around a creepy rental home. Also in 1971 came I, Monster, a loose reworking of Robert Louis Stevenson's strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Then we come into what many refer to as the golden age of Amicus horror anthology films. And it was only natural that the early EC horror comic inspiration would come full circle for Amicus with their first direct adaptation of the comics. 1972's Tales from the Crypt was perhaps their most ambitious horror anthology project to date. The highlight of the 5 stories is probably And All Through the House, A Killer Santa Claus Tale starring Joan Collins. Incidentally, this story was also adapted as one of the first episodes of the HBO television series in 1989. Following the commercial success of Tales from the Crypt, another horror anthology film was made and released that same year in 1972. The wraparound story to this horror anthology involved a young psychiatrist interviewing 4 patients inside an asylum. Arguably, this was one of the best of the Amicus horror anthologies. In 1973, the studio released And Now the Screaming Starts, an oddity about a family curse and a castle that goes to truly disturbing depths. Amicus returned to EC horror comic territory in late 1973 with their horror anthology adaptation of The Vault of Horror. It was one of the most memorable Amicus horror anthologies. Arguably, the most memorable segment involved an entire town of vampires, years before Salem's Lot. It remains a solid fan favorite to this day. Amicus hit Pay Dirt, or should I say Grave Dirt once again in From Beyond the Grave, released in 1974. This was sadly the last of their horror anthology films. This time, the 4 stories took place in connection with an antique store called Temptations Limited. While well received by both audiences and critics, it was clear that audience tastes were shifting with this new decade, especially with the emergence of New Hollywood. The Beast Must Die was also released in 1974. A werewolf movie with a twist. Agatha Christie meets an American werewolf in London. The final Amicus horror film was 1974's Madhouse, the sordid tale of a movie star who is the primary suspect for a string of murders. The last gasp for Amicus, the last 3 movies before their inevitable extinction were adventure fantasies. 1975's The Land That Time Forgot, At the Earth's Core from 1976, and The People That Time Forgot the following year were a last-ditch effort at capturing audience imaginations. Sadly, the strategy couldn't stem the tide of big-budget blockbusters like Jaws and Star Wars. In the end, it wasn't witches, vampires, werewolves, or zombies that killed Amicus. It was shifting audience tastes, the sad decline of the British film industry, box office underperformance, and an amicable parting of ways between founders Subotsky and Rosenberg. So that was the dark and terrifying story of Amicus Studios and their Vault of Horror. Fortunately, other contemporary studios have taken up the baton of independent horror in the new millennium, and many of us look forward to seeing what terrors they unleash next. If you have a favorite Amicus horror film, let us know about it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to do your due diligence by liking, sharing, and subscribing. And don't forget to check out Tabor Corn, a love letter to horror and exploitation film fandom. Link in the description or on screen here.